I'll be honest with you, Armin. I think that um, we are all born in particular ways. Okay, we are who
Mhm.
we are, and it can be a form of masochism, in my opinion,
Mhm.
to read books that keep telling us what we are not or what we should be that we are not.
Right.
And I myself, I don't think that it's impossible to change. I don't think it's impossible to learn for sure. But I also don't think that there is anything meta historical about a particular kind of leadership. There are so many possibilities for leadership out there. There are so many kinds of leaders that I could never essentialize it into principles. But I will say
Mm.
this, and I know that's a bit controversial, and I know that not everybody will agree, but that's,
No, that's fine.
we have different views, right? Machiavelli is a good example of what you were talking about. Machiavelli is really essential reading, not because of the historical circumstances that he describes. Remember, Machiavelli is writing in the 16th century, early
Mhm.
16th century. And what is he writing? What is he writing about? He's writing about specific rulers in mostly about specific rulers in Italian city states
Mhm.
in that time. None of us lived in that time. It's
A
actually
lot
very
of
difficult
trouble,
to, yeah, a
from
lot of
judging from
us,
the books.
a lot of trouble, a lot of wars, a lot of struggle. But what else is new? We are still in times of trouble, a lot of struggle, competition, trade, because there was a
Mhm.
lot of trade competition. These are city states that are, they have relations with each other, but they also are envious of each other. They often, sometimes they're at war, sometimes they're at peace. They make alliances. Um, they have internal crises that come up. Now, my point is that you don't need to know all the history of early 16th century Italy to appreciate Machiavelli. Because Machiavelli is writing about things that are very recognizable to us because they're things that don't change over time, the human nature. So when he says it's better to be feared than loved,
Right.
that's a quote that people often take from Machiavelli.
Mhm.
They don't always understand what he's talking about. But if you actually kind of dissect that statement, then it doesn't matter that he's talking about Italy in the 16th century. It's completely applicable in 2023 or 2024, and it will be applicable 500 years from now if we're still around, right? If we haven't destroyed ourselves. So that's one of the reasons I love texts like Machiavelli, because it combines the historical circumstances of a particular moment in time with the essential traits of what it is to be human. And in this case, specifically what it means to be a leader, what it means to try to to get power, hold on to power, and execute power effectively. So I think that's an excellent example. However, with one caveat, because I know some people are interested in Machiavelli. Machiavelli is writing about people who hold formal political power. You could make the comparison to people who hold formal institutional power or other kinds of power, but we have to have a more open and flexible conception of what leadership is, because not all of us are going to be heads of state or heads of a city state or a prince, like Machiavelli is writing about. There's different kinds of leadership. Leadership can be, okay, you are, yes, you're a president or you're a king, you have authority.
Sure.
But leadership can also be, oh, I started a social impact group, or I created a business,
Sure.
or I'm actually involved in civil society. Or I am a leader in my community and nobody outside my community knows my name. I'm not a famous person, but there are people who look at me as a leader. And those are not the people that is writing about. So it is different, and we have to translate a little bit more in those cases. So then there are other sources. That's why in our field, we don't have a Bible. Machiavelli is not a Bible. Machiavelli is a source. Okay, so I always encourage people, okay, go to Machiavelli or go to other sources, but don't settle for one kind of leadership. Look at other kinds of models and see which one is the most applicable to you and the one that you can learn from the most.
Which other models do you like? I mean, there are certain, like the Stoics, for example, they have a particular framework for certain, like Marcus Aurelius, or, I know that one is quite popular. Are there any other sources that you think, well, we don't have a Bible, but we might have a few good sources. Let's start with 3, which I still, that are worth looking at in general.
Well,
obviously, and there are many more, but as a starting point for the airport waiting time.
Yeah. Well, I've always been drawn to some of the leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States and in other countries as well. And it's not just, and to give one example, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a very famous person. No one needs me to introduce them to Martin Luther King Jr. They would recognize the picture. They probably have at least seen or heard the speech, I Have a Dream, from 1963. But the picture that I always show of Martin Luther King Jr. is not the picture of him standing at Washington Mall giving that speech or meeting with President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, to create the Civil Rights Act, but pictures of him in prison, because the man was arrested dozens of times by the authorities. And why was he arrested? So officially, he was always arrested for disturbing the peace or, illegal assembly, things like that. The real reason he was arrested constantly is because he was telling the truth and he was being very disruptive to the status quo. That's why he was being arrested.